One could say that the fact that you want to put God in the category of believing without argument is motivated by the fact that the arguments that you have are weak.
Could say that. Could say the same thing about other minds. Arguments there are pretty weak too. But the fact is, so when people raise these objections, they say you have to have evidence or argument to sensibly believe in God. One question to ask is, well, what do they think is wrong with you if you believe in God, but you don't have arguments or evidence?
Right.
I mean, what exactly do they think the problem is? You know, what is the criticism? And here there are three possibilities, maybe more, but at least these three possibilities. The first is that you're being irresponsible, that you're not within your intellectual rights in doing a thing like that. So the first idea involves the thought that we have intellectual duties or obligations, and you're not living up to your intellectual obligations if you believe in such a thing as God without having a good argument.
Right.
That doesn't seem to me to be much of a decent argument. I think that's a sort of non-starter, because even if we do have intellectual duties and obligations, it's hard to see how they could bear on a particular belief. I mean, if you have a duty to do something, and then if you don't do it, you're culpable in some way, it must be that it was up to you whether you do that thing or not. But that isn't the way it is with our beliefs for the most part. We can't just decide to believe that, let's say, I can't just decide to believe that I'm a millionaire. That would be very nice, you know, if I thought I was a millionaire, maybe I'd be happier. If I thought I was, say, 30 years younger and very handsome, I'd probably be a lot happier. But I mean, I can strain to the uttermost. I'm not going to wind up believing that I'm 30 years younger and very handsome and a millionaire and the like of that. That's not how it works with us. Belief in God, for my guess is, most people is like that too. It's not that it's something voluntarily adopted and can be voluntarily got rid of. Mm-hmm. So if belief in God isn't really up to me, so to speak, within my power to believe or not believe, then I can hardly be going contrary to some duty in fact, believing. So I don't think that's much of a starter.
Second argument.
The second suggestion as to what's wrong with somebody who believes without evidence or argument is that you're being irrational. Mm-hmm. Now, what is irrationality? Again, there are various thoughts as to what it might be, but here's a suggestion. Human beings have reason, ratio in Latin. So you're being rational, you're acting rationally when you're or believing rationally, when your reason, when your mind, your intellect is functioning properly, functioning the way it's designed to function, designed by God or by evolution. There isn't any malfunction. There isn't any sort of dysfunction. Maybe you can have fixed ideas, for example, idée fixée. You find yourself fixated on some thought. You think it over and over again. That's irrational. That's contrary to the way in which human ratio works when it's working properly. Well, what about belief in God without an argument? Is that irrational in that way? Surely not. Again, most of the world's population, as I say, the vast majority, believes in God or something like God, and the vast majority of those people don't believe on the basis of arguments. It's not that if you do, then you're like someone who has an obsessive compulsive disorder, let's say, and thinks he has to return time after time to lock the door. If you see if he really did lock the door, it's not like that at all. This is, again, the natural human condition. So it's not irrational either. So what is left over then? Mm-hmm. We could call this the de jure question here. You can raise two questions about belief in God. You can ask whether that belief is true. That would be the de facto question. Or you can ask whether that belief is reasonable, rational, meets the right standards and the like of that. That would be the de jure question. So I've said there are these three possibilities. The third one for the de jure question then is this. It might be that belief in God lacks that property, enough of which is what separates knowledge from a lucky guess, from a mere true belief. So suppose Suppose I believe the New York Yankees right now, they're in last place in the American League. Suppose I believe that they will win the pennant and win the World Series this year, despite the fact that right now they're in last place. Now, it might turn out that I'm right. If I do turn out to be right, then this is a lucky guess. It's not that now I know that they will. I just guessed and I was lucky. It just turned out right. So the difference between knowledge and a lucky guess or a mere true belief, that's, we could use the term warrant to refer to that difference, to that property or quality, whatever it is, such that when you've got enough of it for a given belief, then that belief is something you know, as opposed to merely just believing. Well, now it might be that the suggestion is belief in God, when accepted not on the basis of evidence, but in that basic way, doesn't have warrant. And here we'd want to ask them, well, what exactly is warrant? What more particularly is it? And again, different people have different ideas, but here is my idea, which I think is a good idea. It's the idea that what distinguishes a true belief from, a warranted belief, a belief that constitutes knowledge from mere true belief, is that it's been produced in me or in you by cognitive faculties, memory, perception, mathematical and logical intuition, maybe induction, maybe some others, produced in someone by cognitive faculties that are functioning properly, not subject to dysfunction, malfunction, and the like of that, functioning properly in the kind of environment for which they were designed by God or evolution or both, functioning properly in such an environment according to a design plan that is successfully aimed at truth. It might be that some parts of our design plan aren't aimed at truth, but at being able to get along in this cold, cruel world we live in, let's say, or maybe they're aimed at promoting, making available possible real friendship, so that if you've got a certain amount of evidence that your friend has done something wrong, you'll be likely, if this is really your friend, to be pretty dubious about that. It'll take more evidence to convince you than if it were somebody that wasn't your friend. So a belief has warrant if it's produced in us by cognitive faculties functioning properly in the right kind of environment according to a design plan successfully aimed at truth. It's quite a mouthful, but then it's, knowledge is quite an important thing, so it's okay for it to be a mouthful. All right? Now, okay, so suppose now we ask, well, does belief in God, or Christian belief for that matter, does it have warrant? The current suggestion is no, it doesn't, and that's what's the matter with believing in God without evidence. If you believe in it without evidence, it doesn't have warrant. And here I think you have to consider the following. Suppose there really is such a person as God. Well, and suppose, as theism says, he's created us in his image, then he would almost certainly want us to be able to know about him. So belief in God would almost certainly be designed into us by God. It would be part of our design plan. God would create us in such a way that we could know about him and would want to know about him and would think about him and the like. So if in fact belief in God is true, if there really is such a person as God, then in all likelihood it's also warranted. In all likelihood it has this property, enough of which distinguishes knowledge from mere true belief.
And if God doesn't exist?
And if God doesn't exist, then very likely it's not produced in us by cognitive faculties functioning properly according to a design plan aimed at truth, because of course it's not true if God doesn't exist. So that particular part of our design plan wouldn't be aimed at truth, and hence belief in God would not be warranted if God doesn't exist.
Now, whereas this can sound to be circular in its thinking, it is not, because what we're dealing with is a justification for our belief in God. So we're dealing not with the subject of whether God exists or not, but whether it's rational, justified, and appropriate within our intellectual, or as you've put it, epistemic rights to believe.
Right. In fact, what we're thinking about right now is warrant, not exactly epistemic rights. That was the first of those three things, but warrant in any event. So the suggestion is, right, there are two questions. One is whether belief in God is true, and two is whether belief in God has warrant, whether it has this property I was speaking of. And these are quite different questions. So it's not really, as you say, it's not really circular, but it is true that belief in God, at least very probably, belief in God has warrant if and only if it's true. But that means that, that this de jure question really has to start off from or have as a basis, can't be independent of the de facto question. Because if God really does exist, then belief in God almost certainly, very probably does have warrant. And hence one can't sensibly argue that belief in God doesn't have warrant without first showing that there isn't any such person as God. So the de jure question really collapses into the de facto question. And this kind of usual suggestion that some people make, you often hear this, well, I don't know whether God exists or not. That's a very hard question. Who can know a thing like that? But I do know it's not rational or reasonable or sensible or something like that to believe in God. That particular sort of objection is shown by the line of argument I was giving to be a non-starter. It doesn't really go anywhere.